Before we go too much farther and look at a lot of arts and works of art in particular, I want to point out the logic behind the three galleries that make up this exhibition, Classic Black. We wanted to make sure that visitors understood that although these are beautiful objects that deserve our attention, at least I think they do, and I hope you'll agree with me, because of their artistic and technological merit, at the end of the day, it's really important to remember that Wedgwood and the other Staffordshire potters had to sell these wares. This was their livelihood. This is the way they made their money. And so that's why they were always kind of keeping an eye on what the elegant people of 18th century England were buying. Wedgwood, in fact, to that very end, was the first Staffordshire potter to open up a showroom in London so that all the swells of the day could visit that showroom and see the types of objects that he had available for them to purchase. So we took that as inspiration and used this idea of showroom for each of the three galleries that make up Classic Black. This first gallery is a showroom that's meant to evoke someone's sculpture hall or a sculpture gallery. So imagine you're going to IKEA today and they have a living room set up in a room that's meant to evoke your own living room, so you get an idea of what that would look like if you bought it and brought it home. That's what we're thinking of here. Many of the nobility anyway, who lived in 18th century England had their own sculpture halls where they would put on view sculptures that they acquired when they went on a grand tour to Italy or commissioned someone to make. So Wedgwood is thinking about that when he's making these types of objects. So now we're in the second gallery of Classic Black, the second showroom, and as opposed to the first one, which was that sculpture hall I mentioned, this showroom is meant to evoke a library, an elegant library. In the late 18th century, the library was enjoyed by all the members of the family. So, of course, reading took place there, but also gentle conversation and letter writing and maybe embroidery and parlor games. But nevertheless, it would have looked like a library. It would have been filled with books. Many more books are being published these days than in previous centuries. And so to decorate those bookcases, or maybe the broken pediment over a doorway or a wide windowsill in the room, these elegant people would buy portrait busts that were often representing the figures who were the authors of the books that they had in those bookcases. And in a little while, we're going to see busts of William Shakespeare and John Dryden and Ben Jonson, great figures, of course, out of English literature. Behind us here, we have the bust of Socrates, one of the great philosophers from the ancient world. Next to him, the smaller bust is of Seneca, who wrote about Stoicism, again, a great figure from the ancient world. And people in the 18th century enjoyed having these types of figures in their homes, specifically in their libraries, because they served as what we would call exemplars or role models, but that they thought of as worthies. People who because of their accomplishments or their intellect or moral virtue or civic accomplishments, they were people who these 18th century folks wanted to aspire to be like, as well as to read the sources that they may have written. So again, here are two figures from the ancient world. Let's go down here a little bit and we'll see someone whose name you might recognize a little more readily from more recent times. So here we have a wonderful portrait bust of Sir Isaac Newton, still today recognized as one of the greatest scientific minds of all time. Wedgwood would have called a bust like this one of the illustrious moderns, again in contrast to Socrates and Homer and Aristotle and Seneca and all those writers and philosophers from the ancient world. So he was able to offer his customers both the figures from the classical Greece and Rome, as well as figures from more recent times, like Sir Isaac Newton here. As we go along this way, we're going to pass by a table that shows objects of a very different scale, so I just wanted to make sure you knew that these existed as well. Wedgwood made hundreds of these small portrait medallions that people could collect and maybe store in the drawer of an elegant medals cabinet that they might have in the library of their home. So we have Sir William Hamilton depicted here, for instance, who was one of the patrons for Josiah Wedgwood. We have David Garrick also in the case on the other side. He was one of the great theater producers of the 18th century, almost single-handedly, in fact, revived interest in the plays of William Shakespeare. As we get to this corner, this brings out another facet to Wedgwood's capabilities and marketing, because he was always looking to expand his markets. And that is in addition to making wares that appealed to his English customers, he was always looking to find customers farther abroad as well. And one of the more lucrative steady markets for him was Holland, Amsterdam. He actually had agents working for him in Amsterdam who would pass on commissions to him to make objects that they knew their Dutch customers back home would want. And so we have this wonderful bust here with amazing detail of a man named Cornelius de Ven, who lived in 17th century Holland, and earlier in his life he enjoyed some notoriety for his naval exploits, but then later he became a powerful statesman. And this bust is one of my favorites because it has just such great detail where you see the single strands of the wig that he's wearing, or the wonderful detailing in that lace cravat around his neck. So a really great example of what you could do with this black basalt material. As we pass by this wall, we're seeing some of those busts I mentioned from English literature. Shows you an idea of how Wedgwood would offer these in different sizes. The smallest one is William Shakespeare over here, although he did make a larger Shakespeare as well. And then we have Ben Jonson, a contemporary of Shakespeare's, friend and competitor, if you will. And then from slightly later, the early 17th century, we have John Dryden, one of the most important poets out of English literature. Let's go into the third gallery now, our third showroom, and we'll continue our tour.